Welcome to day 5 of our tea extravaganza, where we explore tea, Tao, ourselves, each other. There are some benefits, of course, to this online format, in that, for one, as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, these teachings can land in your life, your schedule, your time, and you can digest them, rewatch them. I like that aspect. And one of the detriments is that we can't share tea. And I don't want to complain about that. I just want to point it out because it's important for some reasons. Of course, you can drink tea during these videos, before the videos, after the videos. But there is much more communicated in actually sitting in the ceremony than talking about it from a distance. And I'm not complaining about that. I just feel like it's worth pointing out because it's not present here. And so I'm really, as a tea person, missing my greatest tool. My greatest way of communicating my Zen is not my words, but my tea ceremony, my tea that I prepare, and tea herself. So what can happen with these discourses, with this format, there's a couple things that can happen. And I keep repeating, I'm not complaining. I'm just pointing these out so we can avoid them and use this format to its best potential. The first issue that can come up is something that I have talked about in other ways repeatedly, which is, I keep saying that to me, teachings are not arguments, they're not stances. I'm not trying to say how it is or how it should be, but rather invitations to explore, questions. Instead of, when you disagree, saying, hey, you should say, hey. And in fact, that's a life lesson. If more people in the world, when they heard something they disagree with, said, hey, instead of, hey, there'd be a lot less conflict. And even when you say, hey, and you question, and then you think, and you contemplate, and you realize that thing you have to take a stand against it. It will be a different kind of stand once you've listened. And it will contain empathy and compassion for that other perspective because you will have heard it instead of reacting to it. So one of the beauties of tea is that tea is a sutra written by nature. It's a scripture written by the earth in the veins of a leaf. It contains no concept, no words. And so you cannot agree or disagree with it. If I give you a bowl of tea, you could say, I don't want any more of that tea, thank you. But it would be absurd for you to say, I disagree with that. Whereas my words and the concepts they represent, you can agree or disagree with, resonate with or not. And that's an issue that's usually not missing, because usually I'm sitting with people for tea. I'm letting the tea do the talking first. So we sit in silence. The tea communicates. The ceremony communicates. They both do. We've talked about that, right? Our first couple days we were talking about the tea communicating. And then in the day 3, started talking about the ceremony itself. Things are transmitted through it. So the ceremony and the tea are communicating what they communicate. And then I'm talking afterwards and kind of just giving words to or translating the experience that everybody had. And I try to do so in a really general way so that as many people as possible will say, yeah, that at least sort of maps to the experience I just had. And some will say, yeah, that maps perfectly. So what I'm saying is, like, if you put humans in a room and they talk about their worldviews, their politics, their religion, they'll argue maybe. But if they sit and drink tea, there's nothing to argue about. They'll come out friends. That non-verbalness means that it really, like a liquid, it flows into the shape of any container. I have some relatives in Florida who are deeply Christian in a very marvelous way, actually. They grew up as like pro surfers, and they started them, along with many people, started this like Christian surfers community. They actually even have their services on the beach sometime, and they're really very deeply spiritual people and wise and powerful. And every time I go to visit them, which is a lot less than I would like, they're always like, tea ceremony, tea ceremony, tea ceremony. And then after the tea ceremony, when I use that really general way to kind of say, hey, here's a little map of what just happened and how you can be empowered to go make that happen more for you. Because they just had that experience, they're not like, they're in fact the opposite. They're like, yeah, that's just like when Jesus, and they start like going off like that. Like it resonates perfectly. The liquid flows. It's nonverbal. It's nature. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a conceptual. Goes into every body the same. And I remember just one more example. One of the most beautiful humans I've ever met in my life is this really amazing Iranian brother, dear friend of ours, and comes to the center. And when he comes to Taiwan, he sometimes does this really cute thing where we drink tea in silence and sit for a ceremony for like an hour. And then again, after the ceremony, I try to use some like general sweeping broad words to, even though it's pitiful, to try to map the experience, yeah. And he'll put his hand on the table and turn to the person sitting next to him and say, you know what he's talking about is Sufi, right? And then he'll launch into some Sufi story. And I've always been amazed about that aspect of tea. But it makes perfect sense that it's nonverbal. So since we are sans that experience together, we haven't sat together in tea first before we have these conversations each day, there's a danger that the focus of this course can be my words. And then there's mental games and arguments and chess and right and wrong, as opposed to just questions. So I want you to make a commitment with me. This is part of your homework. It's a long-term homework. The long-term homework is, for every single word that I've said in this entire 7-day course, at least one bowl or cup of tea. And I'm a big mouth, so you got a lot of work to do. But for every word, really, I mean it, for every word, at least a bowl or a cup of tea. You promise that for me, right? I think the second danger, I said there are two, the second danger worth addressing in this format, once again, not to complain, I like the benefits of this format too, just want to highlight these problems that we can go around them. The second is that this course can potentially, for you, certainly not for me, I've made my contract, I made it on day one, but for you, the course could become an interaction with Buddha. And then I'm in the way. I don't want to be in your way. I don't want to be in your way at all. My teacher always said that no matter how good a teacher's intentions are, if a teacher stands between a student and the light, he or she casts a shadow. So no matter how good the intentions are, when a teacher stands between you and sacred, they cast a shadow. I'm not your middleman. I'm not your go-between. I don't want this course to be about me. I want it to be about tea, about us, about life. So I'm not the portal. A much better metaphor for what I'm providing is tea is a queen. She is a queen of nature spirits, let's say. And you are going to go and have audience with that queen. Ancient queen. Powerful queen. And your conversation with her will be yours and yours alone. What you talk to T about for the rest of your life and what you learn from her is yours. I'm not trying to dictate your conversation. It's your conversation. I'm trying to encourage you to listen and not boss her around. I'm also trying to teach you to continue our metaphor, some of the etiquette for how to behave in her court. Now, if you show up without that etiquette, she doesn't mind. You can drink tea however you like, in a mug, in a pot, in a bowl. Tea is a queen, and a queen is noble and regal and free of judgment. And so when a foreigner comes into her court and doesn't know the etiquette of the court, she knows how to handle that situation. She's not flustered by it. But the conversation will go much better if you follow her etiquette, if that makes sense. It's an analogy, right? It's like if you were going to have an audience with the Dalai Lama this week, and so there would be some attendant that would say, like, you know, there's some guidelines, some, etiquette, but it would be gentle. It wouldn't be like, you must don't believe this and do this. It would be like, look, when you come in, maybe bow, call him His Holiness, da, 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 da. The same would be there for the Pope or for any such person. And if you didn't follow that, if you just walked in and like stuck out your hand and were like, hey, I'm Joe, and like didn't follow the etiquette, the Dalai Lama wouldn't be flustered. He's been around plenty of people in his life. He's like, he understands. He's not going to be flustered by you not understanding the etiquette of hanging out with a Lama. But you might get further if the etiquette's there. The conversation might go better. You might get deeper. This is just an analogy, right? But the conversation is very personal. The conversation is up to you. And so the beginning of the etiquette that I'm offering was the beginning of this course, what I said, which is introduce yourself to her, listen to her, respect her. Stop treating tea like stuff. Stop treating the earth like stuff. It's part of the lesson. But stop seeing it as stuff and start communicating. And communication is a lot about listening. So part of the etiquette is showing up with a desire to listen. It's another analogy is kind of like falling in love with someone. When you fall in love with someone, you want to know more about them. My teacher has been teaching tea for almost 50 years, and he always says, still crazy after all these years, still head over heels in love. I fall more in love with tea all the time. And I've still, after 20, 30 years, have so much I don't know. Sometimes I turn a corner into a whole library of information that I didn't know existed. It's such a vast world, tea. And, you could be intimidated by that, but I'm not. I'm enthusiastic. When you're really in love with someone, even 20 years later, you'll be discovering things that you didn't know about them. And you'll be doing so enthusiastically. You want to get to know them, which means you want to listen. That's the first half. You want to receive what they have to say. But the second half is that you want to show up. You want to be better for that person. Right? That's cliche even. From a movie, like she makes me want to be a better person kind of thing, right? When you're in love with someone, you want to be better for them. The other day we talked about the 4 virtues of tea, right? And we talked about, harmony, respect, reverence, purity, and Jaku, the tranquility. And I said that they're kind of in order, right? If something brings you harmony with nature, with peace, with whatever, you start to respect it. And you respect it, you want to purify it. You want to show up for her. So that means you want to purify yourself. And this is where tea becomes a way of life, where it becomes cha dao. We have a saying in our tradition, which is that we're not learning how to make tea. We're learning how to serve tea. And this has a lot of meanings. The obvious lesson in there is a lesson in humility, that we're not learning how to make something better for ourselves. We're learning how to serve tea to others, put tea in bowls and serve it to others is the goal eventually. But there's also we're learning to serve tea, the spirit of tea. We're learning the connection between the way that tea changes my life and also that part of the way that tea changes my life. One of the big things that I listen to, that I receive from tea, is the inspiration to change my life to meet her. This is tea meets cultivation, cultivation meets tea. So part of what I get from tea is the inspiration to be better for tea. Because the most important ingredient in a tea ceremony isn't the bowls or the leaves or the water or the chashi, it's the mind. Powerful experiment if you have a group of tea lovers. Same tea, same water, same teaware, switch the brewer. When I first started learning about tea, I was a bungler. I'm still a bungler, but less of a bungler a little bit. And I bungled this lesson. It took me a few years. I thought that my teacher made great tea because he knew little secret tidbits of data. Like green tea, 80-degree water, poured from such and such a height, steeped for such and such a time. And that there was these little recipes almost. And if I could memorize these, my tea would be like his. So I learned all of that. That's all available. It's not that that is irrelevant. Of course it's relevant. The chef has to get their skills. The other day we talked about the icon painter. They have to have the artistic skills, right? But his tea was still way better. So then I made my second mistake. I started assuming that it was because he had better tea and teaware. He has antique cups and pots and silver kettles and these things. So I got all that. But then we're out in nature and he making tea with mason jars or with a simple bowl, and it's still better than mine with all that stuff. Then it starts to dawn on you. What starts to dawn on every artist is that in every art there comes a point where certainly you enhance your knowledge and your skill, and that will never stop. But every artist, like Michelangelo said, right, an artist must herself be as close as possible to a saint so that she can bring God into the art. So every artist comes to a point where you realize that who I am, what I'm open to, where my visions are coming from, how pure I am of a channel is also a very strong influencing factor in my art. And that I have to cultivate myself along with my skills and knowledge. And these things, will improve my art. And maybe this will improve my art more than this. That, as I said, a still mind. At the beginning of this course, I said, if you want to learn how to make tea or serve tea, learn how to bow. Learn how to be beneath. This is why I keep warning against that gung-ho tea. Like, I drank some tea, it changed my life, now I'm going to go tell everybody. Because that very easily becomes about you. It's not, you have to learn to bow first, to receive. If you can bow, be fully receptive, fully humble, fully sacred, then if you brew tea from that place, it will change yourself and others. It will be that cycle. Tea is like a really great person. And for another analogy, like you got a friend who's just like, a stunning example of humanity. I'm so blessed to have so many friends like this. And, they're just, really wonderful, wonderful people, solid, whole in ways I will never be. Now, when you have a really great person around, there's kind of two approaches or orientations towards that force. There's the petty egoic constriction, which is like, this person makes me feel unworthy. Ugh. And then you get into, when I was a kid, I had my two favorite books growing up that influenced me the more than anything was Lord of the Rings and The Count of Monte Cristo. Count of Monte Cristo was just, read it and played it. But in that, the Duke, he betrays his best friend that they grew up with. And his best friend is the protagonist of the whole story, the Count of Monte Cristo. And they were childhood friends, this Duke and this, and the Count of Monte Cristo actually is an account, especially at the beginning of the story. He's just an ordinary dude, but he's a really great human, full of wonderful, wonderful qualities. And when he betrays him, the protagonist is shocked. How could you do this? And his answer is, because I'm a duke and I'm not supposed to want to be you. So in other words, he had that fully constricted, like, you're a great human and I want to be like you, but I shouldn't feel that way because I'm special, because society says I'm special, I'm a duke. You understand what I mean? You can look at this is why, humans love trying to knock those people off of their pedestal. Like, try to feel better about your internal issues by knocking other people down, which doesn't work. If I'm on the second step and you're on the fifth, even if I trip you and you fall down all the steps, I'm still on the second step, I haven't changed. And that's a very unhealthy approach to having that great person in your life. I mentioned this yesterday, that some people say, like, all the formality and the listening and all that tea can provide can make them feel unworthy. And I said like that, if that becomes guilt, that's what that Duke did. He turned it into like guilt and self-loathing, and then that turned into a monstrous hunger, an unnatural hunger. But there's a whole other orientation, which is that that great friend can uplift you, inspire you, encourage you to do better. This is what all the saints are there for. They're reminders of qualities that we also have in us, and that we should be feeding. So when we say we're learning how to serve tea, it's about like meeting tea halfway. As tea, instead of like tea is this thing, like a medicine, and I'm going to become dependent on it, and it's going to be my practice, and it's going to do everything for me. It's going to fix me. I'm going to take from it. Which then, you see, that's like you're getting borderline into drug, not medicine. Your need for the medicine should decrease as you get healed. And one of the medicinal qualities of tea is that one of the things that we're going to listen to, aside from those other things we already talked about, listening, I'm not my thoughts, listening to my connection to nature, the essence of nature coming through, listening to the love and compassion that's coming through. Aside from that, one of the things that's coming through is tea reaching out her hand and saying, hey, I love you. Hey, you, I love you. You're so much better than you think you are. You have so much more potential than you think you do. Come meet me. Come be where I am. Rise up. Be inspired. Be better. The next time we meet, purify yourself in between then and now. Don't keep showing up to the tea table every day with the same issues, the same, problems. If you do that, she's a mother, she's a queen. She'll accept you every time. She'll say, there, my son. There, my daughter. And comfort you. Of course tea will. Tea will comfort you no matter where you're coming from. But like all mothers, she also, part of her love then is going to be a little bit like, I'm anthropomorphizing, I'm using metaphors, this isn't literal. Don't take this literally, please. But like a good mother, she's also going to then be a little frustrated. Right? Oh, my poor son, still going through this same issue again and again. Which doesn't mean she's not going to then, cook you soup and comfort you the way she always does. Of course she will. But you begin to realize if you love her, right, part of what she's saying to you is next time we meet, hey you, next time we meet, even if it's tomorrow, be a bit better. Work that stuff out a bit more. I want to see a cleaner version of you next time. You do that for me, honey? You see? Now there are really powerful teas. Super powerful teas. I know because I've tried them, so I have personal experience. I also know from history, there's all these stories of people on death's door and they drink a single bowl of tea and they're healed completely. And we tend to take those as just fables. But there actually are really potent teas that will come across the table and boom, knock you into next week. They exist. But as the world changes and we harm nature, and as people grow more beverage and commodity than they grow medicine, which we'll talk about tomorrow, the power of tea, even in my tea journey, in these 20, 30 years, the power of tea has gone way down. The medicinal juju that's available is decreased, unfortunately. So there's almost even more of a need to meet it halfway, right? To bring the sacred. After all, it's us who makes it a ceremony. It's us that makes it sacred. We bring that. What's the difference between tea drinking and tea ceremony? Tea drinking happens in kitchens and restaurants. Tea ceremony happens in a temple. Tea ceremony happens, that temple could be the woods, it could also be a kitchen. But you see, it's what we do with the space. It's our intention. It's how we show up. It's the sacred. And I think we can all agree that no matter what your views are of the world and the universe and the cosmos and God and the Tao and all those things, no matter what your views are on those, no matter how rational you are in this hyper-rational world where people don't truly see or understand why someone would want to live with sacred in their life every day, I think most people can agree that sacred at least exists as a feeling, a psychological aspect of being human. Beyond that, there's nothing to say. Beyond that, there's just what Thomas Aquinas said so beautifully, right? Which is that with faith, no explanation is needed. And without it, no amount of explanation will do. That's what's left beyond. But let's go to that place where we can all agree that there's a feeling of sacred that humans can feel. Whether or not it corresponds to something and outside of us and what that thing is, let's leave that aside for a second. That feeling, I think even the most cursory survey of human history and prehistory demonstrates our deep-seated psychological need for it. We need it to be healthy, like air, food, sex, all the things that make a human a human. We just need it. And I don't just know that because I surveyed history and prehistory. I know it because I've lived a life without any sacred. I grew up in this hyper-rational world with a father who's a scientist and with a family that mostly didn't understand, let alone see, why anyone would want spirit in their life every day. And then I've lived a life with it in my life every day. I'm much closer to how I want to live. That's up to you to experiment with. But we create the ceremony, we create the space, and so we have to meet it halfway, or it's tea drinking. You see? And that sacred element that we bring is there in all practice. That's the X factor. Without the X factor, you're left with the detritus. Tea without that is just a beverage. Yoga without that is just calisthenics. Tarot cards without that are just some kind of foo-foo ego game. Whatever it is, do you see? That is more really a lot of where it is. So let's talk today. It's just continuing kind of the same conversation of like mountains and rivers and those things. We've talked a lot about listening to tea, but there's not really much more I can say because that is a very personal conversation. I can talk more about ceremony, and in particular the method of ceremony that I practice in my lineage. And all of the things we were saying about tea are analogous to the ceremony also. This is what we talked about on day 3, the Li, which is that there are qualities inherent in the ceremony. And so if you're listening to the ceremony, in the same way that if you're listening to the tea, communication starts with nature. If you're listening to the ceremony, qualities start to come through. Which is why it's very easy for me to get out of the way when someone compliments me. Because if they say, "Woo, you're peaceful," I'm like, "Nah, tea ceremony's peaceful." If they're like, "Woo, you're noble," I'm like, "Yeah, no, tea ceremony's noble." I just associate with this thing a lot, and it wears off on me. It's like infusing into me. But it's that thing. So what I want to talk about today is the ways that the ceremony can infuse in us and the ways that we can infuse the ceremony. Right? It infuses us But again, one of the things that it infuses us with, like tea, the ceremony infuses us with inspiration to be better. Because the better I am, the better my tea will be. The better my tea ceremony will be. And the better it is, the more it will work its juju on me. The more it works its juju on me, the more I will, do you see? Huh? The more it works on me, the more I want to work it. The more I work it, the more it works on me. We uplift each other, basically, at the ceremony. So what are the qualities that the ceremony brings to me? These are the qualities of a tea person, but a tea person, not a quality of woo. They're infusing into me, but they're what it is, right? So they're what we should be talking about. That's why I really often am a little bit apprehensive to do like podcasts and interviews with people, because it's completely unintentional. It's harmless. It's just the nature of the world and where they're coming from and what people want to know about. They always want to spend a huge chunk of the podcast talking about me and my story. So, how do you get interested in tea? Where do you come from? Those kinds of things. I'm not interested in talking about that. I'm interested in talking about tea ceremony and tea, because it can do something for you. Buddha's story can't. So, what are the things that the ceremony has kind of inherent in it? What can it bring to the table? The first, I think, is nobility. A chajin, which is a tea person, is noble. By noble, I don't mean condescending. The opposite. I don't mean some rich royal person who's entitled. By noble, I mean generous. Gives more than she takes. Humble. And with moral dignity. The tea ceremony has unshakable moral dignity. Within a silent tea ceremony, there is unquestionable, unshakable moral dignity. Within the framework of a tea ceremony, within the form of a tea ceremony, it is impossible for me to perform an action that lacks morality, that's immoral. It's impossible for me to speak immorally because I'm not talking. It is technically possible for me to think immoral thoughts, but the more I focus on the method and stay rooted and anchored in it, the less of that there is too. So the more I train, the less of that. So the ceremony is an opportunity for me to be a more saintly version of myself, a more noble person, an upright person. So that's an important one. The second one's really hard to talk about. It's a concept that people talk about it, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, but any language that you use about it to try to describe it can be dangerous, like all these topics, right? And that's the idea of wabi. Wabi is often described as an ascetic of celebration of imperfection. But it's a spirit, it's a way of being. You can't copy it, you can't understand it, you can't conceptualize it. We've been talking around it throughout this course. The best, I guess, analogy in this instance that I use to talk about wabi is people often ask me, what's your favorite tea? What's your favorite tea? It's a common question. And the answer is, my favorite tea is this tea. This tea is my favorite tea. And the more you understand that, the more you understand wabi. And that is an inherent part of the ceremony. And another inherent part of the ceremony is the connection to nature, which we have to be careful with because philosophically we think I'm disconnected from nature and I have to get reconnected to nature. There's no disconnect and reconnect. We are nature. This is just remembering. No human has lost their connection to nature. There's not an extra dimensional bubble between the city and the country. When you come into the city, you're like, bloop. And when you go out, you're bloop. I'm in nature. I'm not in nature. I'm in nature. You're wherever you are, even in an apartment in downtown New York, you're in nature. Nature is everywhere. No animal is like, you don't see a bear going, oh, dude, I had a stressful week. I got to go get out in nature. Nature, like tea, a bowl of tea. Nature, as in like some place in the woods, like a bowl of tea, is just a reminder that we are nature. So we haven't lost our connection to nature. We've lost our feeling of connection to nature. They're not the same thing. The connection's always there. We just don't feel that way. Why? Because our ancestors built their houses out of wood and grew their food and looked at the stars instead of televisions, etc. Synthetic roads, synthetic houses, synthetic calendars, synthetic time, etc. So restoring that feeling of nature. I think another quality that the tea ceremony brings to my life is transparency. That's what that opening does. I think spiritual practice is a lot about opening. Progress is measured in density inversely. Right? The less of my stuff there is, the more the Tao speaks through me, the more Spirit speaks through me, the more I do the work of God, you could say. The more, the tea brews itself. The more, when I make tea, I want to be as natural a part of tea's journey from seed to bowl as the sun or the rain. I want to be as natural a part of that flow as any other element. Like a good example of this is like Zen gardening. The idea is that if a gardener goes into a garden for like 5 hours a day, right? And we're in that garden and we're working in the garden. Now, let's say in that garden there are some rabbits. And the rabbits come and eat up some bushes. And as a result of eating the bushes, one of the paths in the garden moves like a meter. And as a result of them eating those bushes, some other plants grow. We would look at that as a natural change in the ecology of the garden. In the same way as like you look at a river and some frogs spawn and they change the chemistry of the water and the water chemistry changes, it attracts this, and things start changing. We would call that a natural change in the ecology. But you see, if the Zen gardener is within the garden for 5 hours a day and she becomes the garden, lets the garden in, instead of that disconnection of like, I go into the garden and do things to it and leave, right? Which is that living in that thought-based reality. But no, I am nature. I am the garden. Then her changes to the garden are as natural as the rabbits. In fact, if aliens were sitting in their spaceship in outer space watching a nature channel of the Zen gardener, they would be like, their narrator would say, look at the human in its natural habitat. Trimming bushes with metal scissors, right? So in the same way, that sense of natural habitat is a part of that transparency. Another part of the ceremony and what it teaches and brings to my life is fulfillment. A sense of enough. A lot of times when we first start out in tea, because it's exotic, the flavors and aromas are exotic, the experience is exotic, what it does to our consciousness and our body is exotic, there's a movement from the bowl out. It's all about like visioning and going. But the more you practice, the more you travel in Zen and tea, the more it becomes about taking the universe and the ordinary mind is Zen. But Zen is not just the ordinary mind. Right? So, in other words, like what I'm saying is that tea has taught me to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. We have a Zen saying, which is a little bit, like a lot of Zen sayings, a little confusing, but if you unpack it, it's actually incredibly powerful, which is that seeing the extraordinary as extraordinary is actually ordinary. But to see the ordinary as extraordinary is truly extraordinary. In other words, everybody sees the extraordinary as extraordinary. The big fireworks. Wow, it's easy, it's common, it's ordinary to see that extraordinary thing as extraordinary. But to be able to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, that's what's truly extraordinary. To see that all the miracles are in this moment. That you and I are sitting on a giant blue ball filled with fire flying through space at thousands of kilometers an hour. That we have these bodies after billions of years of atomic evolution and hundreds of millions of years of organic evolution, that we're breathing, that we're awake, that there's this tea. All the miracles are in this moment. We don't have to go anywhere. The ordinary is enough. Just make the tea. The act is it. And be fulfilled. If you can be fulfilled with a bowl of tea, you can be fulfilled with anything. So fulfillment is a big one. Harmony is another one. Harmony with myself, harmony with others, harmony with a form and a way of life. And all that is entailed. And then finally, the tea ceremony brings me presence. Brings me presence. That's what we talked about yesterday. One encounter, one chance. The preciousness of each moment. Every day is a good day. Tea has taught me. There are no bad days if you're above ground. Every day is a good day. Every moment is precious. This is the other thing that tea has brought me. And then I told you also that tea has inspired me. It has inspired me to show up and be better. So these are the ways that the ceremony, what I was just talking about was the ceremony, the ways that tea ceremony have changed me. The way that tea has changed me, I think that's just personal. Everyone has to have that conversation on their own. Tea has changed me in ways, and she will talk to you in different ways. But ceremony has changed me in those ways I was just speaking about. But then there's another way it has changed me, which I keep saying, is that it has also taught me, it also inspires me. It inspires me to cultivate myself so the next time I sit down, I'm purer and better. She makes me want to show up every day because I love her. Just like you would for a beloved. You make me want to be a better person is one of the great, most loving things you can say to someone. And I say it to tea every day. She doesn't condescend to me. She makes me want to be better. And so I cultivate myself to show up more. And the ways that I cultivate myself, I want to share, but I want to do so in as general a way as possible because we all come from different lineages and different approaches to life and systems. And so just break it down into as general as I can so that it's applicable to everybody. The things that I do to cultivate myself, to show up for tea, I think are universal. They're universal, right? And there are 6. The first is some form of moral conduct. An attempt to live ethically. Ideally, when our heart's fully open, we can, like Thomas Aquinas said, love and do what thy will. If it's coming out of the purest connection and compassion and listening and being in the moment, being present and flowing with the Tao. But that's a very high state. I'm not there yet, so I follow precepts. The Buddha very beautifully discussed self-cultivation in a way that I also think applies to everyone. He said that the whole of the Tao, the whole of the way, is to perform wholesome deeds, abstain from unwholesome deeds, and purify your mind. And I don't think that's a Buddhist saying. There's nothing sectarian about that. That is human and universal. No matter what practice you practice abstaining from unhealthy deeds, performing healthy deeds, wholesome deeds. and purify your mind, because if you don't purify your mind, you won't be able to abstain from unwholesome deeds or perform wholesome ones. So I have precepts in my life. I have ethical standards. I use them like a crutch. Why do I need crutches? Because I got a broken leg. I'm a bungler. If I was whole, I could be in the Tao and my action would flow out of it. But sometimes I'm not. And sometimes a lot of situations are morally ambiguous to me. And in those cases, I relax into my peaceful dwelling, my ango, my backbone, which is my precepts. So some form of moral conduct creates a backbone. Because as long as you're not abstaining from a lot of unhealthy deeds, it's going to be very difficult for you to cultivate yourself. You're going to be at the mercy of the world a lot more. And then second, and again, I'm trying to keep these general so they're applicable to all traditions and lineages, right? Second, very important, is to study and contemplate. Learn, and that could be about all things, and having that childlike wonder, but, surround yourself with the teachings of the wise. There's thousands of years of scriptures and books and commentaries and amazing wisdom. Surround yourself with it. Study, contemplate, learn from the mistakes of others, learn from the wisdom of others, and that's a really powerful one. Number 3, movement. There's no separation between body and spirit, at least in this life. Your views about that in the afterlife are your own. But for now, we're embodied. And movement is a big part of life. And whether you see spirit and body as one, or you see the spirit in the body, doesn't really matter. For now, they are one. And so how we move influences how we do everything. Movement exercises are good for our health and our breathing and our well-being, and change our ability to do everything that we do. This includes yoga. If you don't have a movement practice and you want one that is the most conducive for tea, then that of course would be Tai Chi or Qigong. But if you already have a yoga practice, don't feel the need to switch from yoga to Tai Chi or Qigong. It's just as applicable. Just that there's a little bit more nutrition or fertilizer between tea and Tai Chi and Qigong, but it's a slight benefit, and it's not worth, like if you're very invested in a yoga practice, it's not worth stopping that and switching or adding it even. Stay with the yoga. Or exercise is another obvious one. Ordinary exercise, also very powerful. So movement. Then we come to the most important one, the most relevant one, the one that is central to everything. My teacher used to put it this way. He always said over and over again, there are 3 methods of spiritual cultivation. You can take your pick from any of them. Meditation, meditation, or meditation. Meditation. I believe, and this is my opinion, you can take it with a grain of salt. I believe if there ever was a time, I don't know about past times, I didn't live in those past times, but certainly in this age, 2020, I think meditation isn't just a requirement for spiritual cultivation. I think it's a requirement for sanity in this world. The way this world stands right now, meditation is required for sanity. It's just such an essential nutrient. It's like vitamin C. Without it, you get scurvy. You get the scurvy of the mind if you don't have meditation. Meditation is the foundation of everything for me. Zazen is my practice and is my answer. Then number 5 is the faith, devotion, prayer. We can't do this on our own. I can't do it on my own. There's no pulling yourself up. You can't live without help. Like you don't make your own clothes, grow your own food probably, at least not all of it, and et cetera, et cetera. We need the world, we need help. And if you're foolish enough to think that humans are the highest power in this world, that's just utterly absurd. We're so teeny. And, what's out there to you is for you. It doesn't, even for me as a Zen practitioner, the who or what we're praying to, for me, we can set aside. I personally pray to Guan Yin, but like whether or not Guan Yin exists isn't important to me as much as the effect that praying has on my life. It opens me. It allows me to listen. It stops flooding the arena of the Tao with all my desires and fears, and let the world do things for me. Let things happen. Let me open and see possibilities and roads that I didn't before. And just, and in that openness, I'm also open to her existence and help. And whatever it is that you pray to. Same thing, right? It doesn't, for the purpose of this discussion, the who or what isn't important because we're all different people, and we'll just have disagreements about that. It's okay. It's not that I'm dismissing the who you pray to. I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. I'm just saying that we can, in order to find common ground, focus on the effects of having faith and prayer in your life, as opposed to the who the faith is to. We can agree, find our common ground, and agree that having faith and prayer in one's life is a good thing. And not discuss the faith to who or what, because then we might, disagree. So let's leave that conversation aside and not talk about it, and just talk about the part that we do agree upon, which is that faith is an important part, devotion is an important part, prayer is an important part. It opens us up. I need help, flat out. I can't do it. I cannot lift myself up by my shoestrings. I need assistance. And I don't want, so we can, that could be a rabbit hole, but that's there. And then the final one that I think is the way I cultivate and everyone cultivates is selfless service. All that we gather in life, we talked about the 4 stages of life. All we gather in life, you can't keep it. All your power, all your possessions, all your knowledge, its only function is to serve others. You give it away or it will be taken. If you hoard it, it will just be dispersed when you die. If you don't give it away, your children are just going to fight over it after you're dead, and it's all going to be junk. If you've ever participated, and I have participated in going and cleaning up someone who's passed away, cleaning up all their possessions, it's a huge ordeal. And nobody wants any of it. My mom is still trying to pawn that stuff from her parents and grandparents onto me every time I see her. She's like, have this photo album. I'm like, I don't want that photo album. Nobody wants that photo album. All the possessions, and not just physical possessions, your knowledge, your power, it's all an inhalation. You can't keep it. The only fulfillment you will ever find in life, the only function of gathering anything is to give it. You have to gather it to give it away, or you haven't completed its function. And actually, it's joy. The joy isn't in the gathering, it's in the giving. You're not made bigger by gathering more. You're made bigger by giving more. That's a big misunderstanding of this world, modern world, is that we gather more, we will be more. But it's not so. It's not the more you hoard, the bigger you are. It's the more you give, the bigger you are. So gather to give. Now, we can break all these 5 down and map them to our earlier discussions of mountains and rivers, right? My teacher used to say, right? in Zen and in Tea, we learn to travel by land and travel by sea. Travel by land and travel by sea. Be a traveler, where you can travel the mountains and the rivers. When you travel by land, you need resources. You need training. Your body has to be in shape to climb the mountain. So you have to be in physical shape, and you need a compass, and you need a map. You need knowledge. You need skill. You need method to travel by land. You need effort. But when you travel by sea, you're at the mercy of the wind. You have to let go. And you have to pray. And you have to let the world carry you. To let God carry you. And so and then we get to this is the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. This is the land is the courage to change the things I can. And we get the wisdom to know the difference. Know when to travel by land and when to travel by sea. And be able to travel both ways. This is a life of cultivation. And so Tea does a lot of things for me. But one of the things that she does for me is to help me, inspire me to show up and be better every time I see her. So it's not Tea's putting me down and making me feel unworthy. It's uplifting me. Let's take a breath. That's our heaven for today. Those of you skipping over my gibberish, good for you. A bowl of tea for every word. And welcome to the Earth section of today's course. So we have learned how to hold the bowl and how to sit up and how to listen to tea. We've learned a ceremony. So we can not just listen to tea, we can listen to the ceremony, because the ceremony contains qualities like nobility and generosity and service, etc. Wabi, all that. We've learned about water and its role in our lives and in our tea. We've learned about chashi and how it helps us celebrate the occasion and be present and honor our guests and honor the occasion. Today we're going to shift to teaware and also learn a slightly new brewing method. Slight adaptation. But first we're going to talk about teaware in general. All of it, bowls, kettles, pots. Not so much specifically, because we're not there yet. Not in this course. This is still, more starting Cha Dao. We'll get into more of those details later, maybe in another online course or in person if we meet. I want to talk more in general about teaware. And about what we're looking for in teaware. And what we're looking for is hard to talk about because it's that wabi, it's that spirit. A good piece of teaware is peacefully reposing where it is. That's that shibui or shibusa, is the noun and adjective. That unadorned, peaceful, fully itself, enlightened. Good question. Is it just people that can be Buddhas, fully awake? But peacefully and fully what it is kind of a big part of what we're looking for. That it rests where it is. That's the best analogy that I can use. That it rests where it is. It's free of duality. So this might sound a little bit deep, but there's a difference between happiness / sadness and contentment. Happiness is an emotion that rises, and then when things go wrong, it's popped and out comes sadness. Right? Contentment stands apart from that duality. And tea teaches us every day is a good day. Even the bad days are good. I learn. I'm challenged. I grow. And good days are good. Yay. But contentment is okay with either of it. In the same way, the beauty of teaware is not the beauty as opposed to ugly. It's not caught in that duality. It's not caught in fashion. It's not novel. It's timeless. In fact, as best as I can, I have right here, this several 100-year-old teapot. As beautiful as the day it was made. And its spirit is within. It has no self-pretense, no self-expression. Its spirit is within it, and it's whole, and it reposes peacefully. I don't know if that comes through in the camera, but it reposes very peacefully. And then, of course, it is perfectly functional, because teaware is a living work of art, and it's meant to be used. It only finds its beauty in use. And this ultimately unpacks really a very important point, which is that we hinted at this yesterday when we talked about the unknown craftsman. There is a natural change from the inside out. That's wabi. That's the Zen gardener becoming the garden, and her changes are as natural as the rabbits. And then there's a forced change from the outside, from the mind-made place, from a place that doesn't feel connected to nature. These are the adaptations that kill traditions. Right? I want to do it that way because it's my way. Right? People want to come to Tai Chi class on the first day and be like, this doesn't resonate with me. I want to do it like this. You got to be the thing first before you can adapt it. So certainly, as the unknown craftsman, as the dude in the ancient time, as he's sitting there, he's using a traditional method that was taught to him by his father, and his grandfather taught it to his father, or the grandmother taught it to the granddaughter, to the daughter, to the daughter, to the daughter. And so you have this traditional method. But of course, as the potter uses that method over and over and over again, every piece is unique. But the uniqueness, the changes, are happening from the inward out. It wasn't until 17 years of daily practice that I made a single adaptation to our tradition. By that time, I am the tradition, do you see? And the adaptation is growing from the inside, from the spirit of it. It's not something imposed from the outside to make it easier, like more quick and convenient for me, or because my ego wants it that way, when I don't even fully understand it. How can you adapt it if you don't even fully understand it? And you can't really fully understand it until you become it. So after years of practice, that potter's following that method, and every bowl has some little variance. But that variance is happening naturally. Right? So it's beautiful. There are these grand treasures in Japan. That are these teawares that are like priceless. And the most valuable of all of them, it's actually in a box, in a temple. The last time that it was sold for a fife. A fife if you don't understand, I'm glad you don't understand, because the fact that you don't understand what a fief is means that the world is evolving away from the Dark Ages. A fief is basically a territory and all of its people and all of its produce. So in other words, this bowl was traded for a province and all the people that live in that province and all the food that it produces. It was traded, in other words, for a governorship. Think about that. And you know what it is? It's a cracked old Korean rice bowl. Literally. It's literally like what was to that potter, to that Korean potter 800 years ago, like a completely, like, first of all, they're just making like 100 of them a day. It's just like a piece of junk. And they're just using it to eat. It was such an ordinary thing. But it had warped in a very beautiful way. You can see a picture of it. And it was made in a very special way. It's absolutely stunning. And its changes are natural, do you see? But what's happened nowadays is the Western method of provenance has come into the equation. And that shifts the whole dynamic. Why? Because nowadays an artist is forced to make a name for themselves in order to make a living. In order to sell art and eat, an artist has to make a name for themselves. And that means their art has to be distinguishable from other people's art. You have to be able to look at the painting, look at the piece and say, oh, that's a Jackson Pollock. Oh, that's a Warhol. You have to be able to, like, they have to make something different. And so the art world is intentionally breaking traditions. There's a beauty in that when it comes to especially a painting or some kind of that form of visual art. But when we're talking about an art that only finds its pinnacle, only finds its highest beauty in use, that's a problem. First of all, because you see, then the change is forced. It's egoic. It's mind-made. I'm going to make my pots look like this, not because of the spirit of teapots, not because it will function better, but because then my pots will be very characteristically mine. Which, it's not their fault. They're forced to do that in order to make a living. Do you understand? In I Ching, I told you they used to put the stamps of past masters on the pots, which is to say the tradition made this pot, not me. Because I'm following traditional ways. Now they put their own names. And now they take traditional shapes and they warp them. And those warped shapes often don't function well. People come to Taiwan, they've never brewed tea in their life. They go off and they buy a tea set. This has happened literally. They come to the center, they try it out, and they're like, wait a minute, this doesn't function. They've only been brewing tea for a few days and they know it doesn't function. So what to say of the one who was making it? You see, in the old days, the people who were making the pots were people who brewed tea. So they brewed tea every day. They knew the function. One of my dearest friends and also an influential teacher in my life is Peter Novak, and he's written in our magazine, and you can read about it. He's talked about it to me also, which is that as he started to brew tea in the methods of this tradition, it started to then change his ability to make pots and bowls for brewing tea in this way. Because he understood little things about how you hold it, but also he understood its inner essence, the spirit. So we want something made with tea spirit that was made to function in tea, not made to look a certain way and then be very awkward. That's beauty as opposed to ugly. That's not the best of teaware. The best of teaware should shine from within, and it should have that function and not that imposed ego, but rather the beauty in the function, the form in the function, if that makes sense. And that's just an issue in the modern world. It's not the fault of potters or ceramicists. It's just the flow. These were ordinary objects back in the day, so they weren't like art. My teacher went one time to a seminar with some of the grand masters in I Ching, and he was very curious about something. He was curious about why the old pots, the Qing Dynasty pots, made such better tea. There's a lot of reasons. But he asked the masters, why? The craft, hasn't been lost. And one of them stood up and answered and said, no, you're wrong. In those days, they didn't understand the science of clay. We understand the science. We can blend any color we want. In those days, they used wood fire kilns. We have electric kilns. We can get the temperature down to a degree and reduce problems. In those days, they used simple tools. We have very refined, hundreds and thousands of tools. We can make much better things. In those days, they just made teapots. We make works of art. And everybody clapped. And my teacher at first thought they didn't answer his question. But then he got home and he realized, yes, they did answer his question, which is that why the old teapots are better for making tea is because they were making teapots. And now they're making work of art. That makes you see the point. It's an obvious kind of situation. The two should be together. In other words, is what I'm saying, and should come out of a spirit of tea, a love of tea, an understanding of tea. Just like you need a photographer to design a camera. I can't design a skateboard because I don't know how to skateboard. The best person to design a skateboard is somebody that skateboards, etc. Yeah. All right. So you want to find teaware that is like that, understated, functional. Not just aesthetic, but from the spirit of it. And what's happened is I've started over the last 15 years to share our lineage with the world. And I've started to give away these teachings and these ceremonial methods. And so they've spread to wonderful people like you. And of course, where there's demand, there's supply. So all these potters have seen all these people are brewing tea in that way. And they start making pots for us, even though they themselves don't drink tea in that way. Does that mean those pots are completely unusable? Throw them in the trash? No. Is it the fault of those potters? No. They're just doing their best, making art, and some of those pots are wonderful. But they won't ever be as wonderful as the pot made from someone who is making tea in that way. If you brew tea in this way, and you make a pot for someone that brews tea in that way, it won't be as good as the pots that you make in the way that you brew tea. Does that make sense? Good. That brings us to today's edition, which is the side handle pot. And I just told you it was 17 years before I adapted my lineage in any way. This is my adaptation. It's my great gift to the generation after me. And your generation will have some great gift that you will give to the next generation. And like that will grow. Side handle pot brewing and the method that we're going to learn today, it's very important that you not approach this as some kind of advancement, as like level 2. It's actually important that you not approach anything in tea that way. Remember, 1 to 10, 10 to 1. There's nowhere to get to. Stop being in a rush to go somewhere and rest in goalless practice. One of my favorite quotes of all time, Master Suzuki, he said, is it better to succeed or find fulfillment in the effort? If you don't understand this, you're not ready for Zen. If you do, you've just found one of the greatest treasures in all of life. So rest in the practice. This is not an advancement. It's not, I got to graduate from here and then I'll graduate to Kung Fu tea. No. 1 to 10, 10 to 1. Stop being in a rush also. Right? The boy asked his master, how long will it take me to be like you? 5 years. What if I work really hard every day? 10 years. What if I become a monk and work all day like you? 15 years. Wait a minute. Why do you keep saying it's going to take me longer? Well, because one eye on the goal and one eye on what you're doing means you've only got one eye on what you're doing and you're going to mess up half the time. It's twice as slow. 2 eyes on the goal means you got no eyes on what you're doing. You're never going to get there. If you sit in the junior high school and all day look out the window at the high school and daydream, you're not realizing that the people in the high school got there because they were once in junior high school. And you're also not paying attention to the lessons, which means you're going to fail junior high school and you're basically disrupting your ability to get to the high school. You got to be where you are, pay attention, stop being in a hurry. This side handle pot is not an advancement. It's not a level 2. what it is this. It is just an extension of leaves in a bowl ceremony, of the ceremonial method we already learned. The ceremonial method we already learned is the traditional one, the real one, the best one. However, that way of brewing, that ceremony is very old. And in the last 300 years, we have had an explosion of types of tea. There's been a lot of innovation in tea production, which has created all kinds of wonderful, new, beautiful teas. And a lot of those teas were designed to steep in pots, not go in bowls. Because steeping in pots for, a long time, at least, has been since the Ming Dynasty, right? Ming is 1368 to 1644. So since the early Ming, steeping in pots has been kind of the mainstream way of making tea around the world. So of course, since then, as innovation in tea production has happened, it has been with that in mind. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of types of tea that don't really work leaves in a bowl. Compressed teas, teas with lots of little buds, and etc. You can't, it just doesn't function. So something that was kind of always on my mind was, what kind of vessel could we bring into the leaves in a bowl ceremony that would continue the leaves in a bowl spirit, but expand the possibilities of the types of tea that we could bring into that old way? So what tool could I bring into the ceremony to extend its use, its applicability, so that this is the best kind of adaptation. Do you see? The best kind of adaptation is that the tradition has found itself in a new territory. And so it has to adapt to that new world. Right? One of the biggest human mistakes, one of our biggest problems as individuals and as a society, is that we often try to try and change the terrain to suit our map. We've talked about this. Instead of making a map that suits the terrain. A Qing Dynasty map of Shanghai isn't going to get you very far. Make a new map. Align your vision with the world as it is, right? So as the tradition finds itself in new situations, adapting so that it can apply. Remember I said, right, without tradition, nothing survives. But if a tradition doesn't adapt, it won't survive. Right? So it's just to extend the amounts of tea that we can brew. And it was 17 years in the making, because then there was the thought of what kind of vessel? And for that, you have to really study the history of side handle pots. We are going to upload the magazine that has the entire history of side handle pots in it. I welcome you to read a much more detailed story of this. I chose side handle pots because they're amongst the oldest. The oldest is side handle pots and cauldrons for boiling medicinal herbs. And side handle pots then evolved in some other ways. And so there's kind of a few lines that they evolved over time. They evolve into pure tools for boiling Chinese medicinal herbs. And they started to change shape away from tea and just be used for herbal formulas. And then they evolved into water kettles for boiling water for tea. And then, like me, the Japanese also looked back on the history of teapots and took a look at the most ancient form. They're traditionalists, so they liked the old school. And they then took side handles and adapted them into the kyusu for brewing green tea, which is not the side handle we use in our tradition. Could you technically use a kyusu in the ceremony I'm going to teach you? Yes, but it's different. So when I chose the side handle, I wanted the original one, the ones that shamans and Taoists were using thousands of years to boil their tea, so that it would have an homage to that. So I didn't create side handle pots. I just chose a very traditional vessel to bring into my tradition's ceremony to extend its capacity to new types of tea and situations. If you want to read a more rich version of that, look at the Side Handle magazine, and you can look at the side handle pots and the way that they've adapted in their different forms, and read all about it and what they look like in this tradition, right? The most side handle pots you'll find are kyusus. So first of all, kyusus have a very fine filter inside because green tea in Japan is very fine. Second of all, the handle and the spout are flat and they're 90 degrees usually. And the pot is more squat and designed for that kind of tea. Our side handle pots are designed based on the ones that were used to boil herbs and in particular tea in ancient times. So the spout and the handle are closer together and the spout is cocked up, and there's other differences, okay? So I have one here. We're going to learn side handle pot ceremony. It's essentially the same as the one we just learned. There are just a few small tweaks, but the energy is the same. This isn't a graduation. It's not like I learned leaves in a bowl and now I'm done with that and I moved on to side handle. No, actually leaves in a bowl is the more traditional one. It's better. I didn't replace it with this. I just used this for the situations that call for this, so that I could keep the tradition alive, because if the tradition doesn't adapt to suit the tea world as it is now, it will die. And all the wisdom with it, because without tradition, there's no wisdom. But without adaptability, there's no tradition. You understand? Good. So it's really all going to be a lot of the same things. The 5 basics apply, and we can learn it now. Okay? We often start with the pot out. You don't have to. You could bring it out. We're not going to turn it or anything. There's no way to do that. But that's why we often start with it out. But in the same way, we're going to bring the bowls in, right? And Eensy Weensy Spider, and 1, 2, 3, I'm turning towards this way for this hand, this way for this hand, towards the guests, right? For now, don't worry about which side the bowls are on, right? And I'm turning and bringing out this one. And this one, I'm going to use this hand because it's this side. So 1, 2, 3, it's going the other way. It's going this way, right? Okay? Yes? Good. Now, just like the other ceremony, we need the genshui. We're going to wash all the teaware. Same reason. Purify the space, purify the ceremony. Same thing. This genshui is coming in. 1, 2, 3. This genshui makes a little ringing noise, which is I actually like. Those little natural noises in tea, you can start to pay attention to them. They're beautiful. And notice I'm putting it on the side of my offhand. This is important, right? And then we have some water, so we're going to wash everything very much in the same way. Here there's an added step. Again, if I had many bowls, I would switch hands. But because it's just a little cheat, I only have 3 bowls, just a little cheat, I'm just going to not do that. And we're also going to wash the pot. This is an added step, right? We're going to rinse the pot the same way that we would rinse all the bowls, everything, yeah? So now in the same way, remember how in the leaves in a bowl, we come to center, to genshui, to center and back down. And I said one of the reasons for that is so that we can switch hands, right? But I also said we don't cross the vertical space. So later on when a pot is involved, this will help us go around the pot, right? Now, like obviously in this scenario, there are exceptions. Like with this bowl, you kind of have to go over a little bit. There's an exception always to every rule, but we do our best. I come to the center, right? I go here, and I'm going to wash it same bicycle fork, turning towards myself, right? And I know it's going around because I feel the wetness on my thumb. My hand is straight, doesn't move. It's a bicycle fork. This is the foundation. This is the guide, right? And now they switch. This becomes foundation. This becomes guide. 1, 2, 3. Back to the center and down. Now this one obviously is going to have to come over a little bit, right? It's coming to the center here, and then this hand's foundation, this hand's guide, and this hand's moving, this hand's not moving. Yang, yin, goes all the way around. Now they switch. This hand's not moving. This is yin, this is yang, this is a guide, and 1, 2, 3, and to the center and down, right? And then this one, I'm going to use this hand, right? So I'm going to bring it here to switch hands. Yeah, switch hands, and then cleaning towards myself, and 1, 2, 3, and then back here, and then here, right? Now I'm going to rinse out the pot, right? So rinse out the water from the pot into the Jen shui, yeah? And then, remember my hands are here always, keeping my hands in the center, those 5 basics. Out comes the tea, right? And turning 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to put the tea into the pot. We don't need to fluff it like we did for leaves in a bowl, right? We can pour it in. We could also use a scoop. We could also use a scoop. If you use a scoop, though, you can't turn the tea when it comes in. Even this one, this is not a round dish, so it's a little awkward to turn. So sometimes we don't turn the leaves inside handle bowl tea. We bring out a scoop and use a scoop to put the tea into the pot. So not necessarily, that's another slight adaptation, right? Sometimes you have a scoop or you have like this, a dish that's not round and you don't need to spin it. I'm not going to put too much. I don't want to waste tea. Now, just as we wash the bowls, we're going to wash the tea. We don't get to do that in leaves in a bowl tea, but we are going to do it in this. It's actually, this is one of the bonuses of this method. This is one of the gifts that this method provides us, is that just as we are purified, as the teaware is purified, as we are washed clean of our journeys to get to the tea ceremony space, the tea can be washed of her journey, washed of her dust of the world. She can shake off her dust and become a pure spirit. And we can wake her up because she's been dry and asleep, and the water comes and wakes her up, invites her in. So we get this added bonus that we're going to rinse off the tea, which we don't get to do in leaves in a bowl ceremony, and we get to do here. We get to say, wake up, welcome, and wash off your dust the way that we wash off our dust. And so we're going to rinse off the tea, yeah? Now the Jen shui goes away, and 3 turns out. 1, 2, 3 turns out, and the Jen shui goes away, right? And now we're going to pause, right? And take a breath before we lift up the kettle, right? And we are then going to, after we take that breath, take that pause, we're going to, right, put the water in the pot, let it steep, keep our hands here, and then we're going to pour. And one of the amazing things of that, in the first basic of dividing the space, I gave you that A with the button. Remember the cartoon explosion, keeping your hand here. Because with a side handle pot, it is by definition only towards your strong hand. So if you're left-handed, you need a side handle pot with the handle on this side. I'm right-handed, so mine's going this way. So that means by definition, I have to cross the center plane to pour tea. Right? But that hand, keeping that hand there, really restores the balance of that cross. And you can see it, especially if there's many bowls. So if there's many, many bowls here, and we got one way over here, it's just like when I demonstrated the basics, and I grabbed something without my hand here, and I grabbed that same thing with my hand here, and you can see how I stayed connected. In the same way, when I cross the line by going this, like this, to pour some tea, right, you can see it's very off balance, right? But when I keep my hand here and I go to pour tea here, now you see it's almost like I'm not crossing the line. It keeps me balanced, right? It really does. You can try it. When your left hand's here in the center and you have to cross that plane with the side handle, it's unbelievable how much more balanced it is and how less you're breaking that rule. And also we learned how to hold the kettle, right, by riding our index finger down the handle, as opposed to using our thumb like this, right? And I talked about when you use your thumb in the kettle like this, there's just on, off, and you don't have a lot of circular motion. You don't have as much circular motion. You don't have as much control over the flow and the pour. The same is true for the side handle, right? Some people hold side handles with their thumb. It's a more modern way. They put their thumb on the button. But same thing then, you just have on, off, on, off. You're also always then pointing the butt of the teapot towards your guests. And you're pouring the tea towards yourself, which just like we do pour the wastewater towards ourselves, we don't want to pour the tea towards ourselves. Ideally, we pour it towards the guests, but at least sideways, right? And you also have a lot less control over the circular motion and over the fluency. So the proper way to hold the side handle pot is with your index finger on the button, like so. Your index finger on the button, just like the kettle. And you have a lot more control, circular and over the pour, and you can then pour sideways and not towards yourself. And that's one of those areas where I told you, somebody who doesn't brew tea the way that we do, and they want to make side handle pots to sell us, they might assume that we're holding it with our thumb because they saw somebody else doing that. And then that pot won't be designed properly. We've literally had that happen. So index finger here, and I'm going to keep my hand here, and I'm going to pour, right, and try to pour onto the rim of the bowl to prevent bubbles. Okay. And then, just like with leaves in a bowl, the first steeping, I'm going to bring to my heart and make eye contact with that guest, smile, and I'm going to offer it to them and open my hand, the part of the bowl that I'm not drinking from, right? And my second bowl, I'm going to offer it to this guest, and open my hand, offer the part that I'm not drinking from, make a gesture, let them drink, like that. Yeah? And then don't pick up my bowl till they pick up theirs. And so then we drink our bowls. Right? We drink our bowls. And then again, I'm going to collect the bowls, and I'm going to go from my offhand to my strong hand, and my bowl is last. Bring them all back in. Yeah. And once again, take a breath, stop, and once again, right, steep our second steeping, and let it steep. And after I let it steep, I'm going to then, hand in the center, pour on the edges with my index finger on the button of the pot, pouring. And now from the second steeping on, I don't look at my guests, I just give it to them, but I still open it up, offer the part my hand wasn't on, right? You can change directions. So the first steeping, maybe you hand them out this way, and then I just did that again, but it might be better to change, do the second steeping this way, and then the third steeping this way. Don't get lost in concentrating too much on that. If you lose that rhythm, it's okay, but it's good to separate who gets their bowl first to make things a little bit more equal. So we drink tea like that. Some time passes, however many bowls. I would suggest at least 3, again. And then it's time to wrap up the ceremony. And in the same way that we wrap up leaves in a bowl ceremony, we end with a bowl of water. And so we would bring the last bowl, the empty bowls in after that last steeping. And in this case, we're free. Also, this is another benefit of this brewing method. We're free of having to scoop the leaves out and wash the bowls again. Right? Sometimes there's little bits in them, but I tend to just leave that and let the water mix with that. So in this case, all I got to do is just add water for the last bowl. Add water, and then hand out that water. And then after everybody drinks their water, bring the bowls back in, and when everything's in, we bow. Right? I think I forgot to mention the bow at the beginning. So bungled that. Constant bungling. But at the beginning also a bow before we start, and then at the end a bow here as well. So really quickly again, run through it, right? A bow, right? Then bring out the bowls, spin, yeah? Then we're going to bring out the gin shui. Then we're going to fill the bowls in the pot. Then we're going to center, this hand's the fork, rinsing towards myself, and then 1, 2, 3, and then to the center and back for each of the bowls, right? Then we're going to rinse out the side handle. Then we're going to bring out the tea. If it's in a scoop, we're just going to put it in. If it's in a round dish, we could spin it like we do in leaves in a bowl. Then we're going to rinse off the tea, and then we're going to put the gin shui away with the spin out. Yes? Then we're going to take our breath between every steeping because we've committed to that, the 10 evers, right? And then we're going to steep the tea. And we're going to then, using our hand in the center, holding the pot with our index finger on the button, right? And you can experiment with that. Play with using your thumb versus your index finger, and you'll see which one is really gives you so much more fluency and connection also, and like, yeah, it's just a lot better. And then, so I'm going to pour, and then the first bowl comes to my heart, and the smile, the eye contact, so important. Really welcomes people, makes them happy to sit in silence, makes things not so heavy, right, and solemn, but joyous. Joyful silence. Welcome silence. And then handing out the bowls, I turn them to offer the part my hand's not on. Then back in, back out. This is the breath of the tea ceremony, right? We are one, we are separate. We are one, we are separate. They are both truths. They're both truths in any moment. We are one and we are separate. We are one and we are separate. Yeah? And then after I decided I'm ready to be done, the bowls come in. We don't need to do anything like we do leaves in a bowl. We just add water, right? And then we hand out the water. The people drink the water. The bowls come back in, and we bow, and that's the end of the ceremony. Yeah. And so you in this method, you gain a couple things and you lose a couple things. You lose some and you gain some. You gain an ability to brew some types of tea you can't brew leaves in a bowl. But the type of tea that you can brew leaves in a bowl, I think, is better brewed leaves in a bowl. It's more traditional. You get to look at the leaves too. There's a power in that. It's more simple. There's a power in that. It helps you to let go more of the quality of the tea and be more in wabi. What's my favorite tea? This tea. As opposed to it tastes a little better this way or that way, or that qualitative evaluation, which is mind-made. Ultimately, of course it is. Doesn't mean it's not important. It's just relative, right? 5 grams of the highest quality tea on earth worth thousands of dollars, and 5 grams of really low quality tea, you put it in the forest and it turns into 10 grams of dirt. And the bugs don't care, and the frogs don't care, and the Buddha said the road cares not if it's paved in gold or cow dung. In fact, you could write a meaningful argument that the earth values cow dung more than it values gold. It's not really, but you could argue thus. So letting go, bowl tea is a lot about letting go of the quality, and this is my favorite tea. That's the spirit of wabi. And I think that's more facilitated with the leaves in a bowl. Leaves in a bowl tends to be a little bit more intimate as well with tea. It's a little bit more connected to her, less between you and the tea. There's a little bit more intimacy, a little bit more connection. And I find that quite powerful. And what side handle provides is an ability to brew those teas that can't be gold leaves in a bowl. I like the ability to rinse the tea off, that like us, she's like a member of the ceremony as much as we are. And you don't need to stick your hands in the bowl and then wash them again at the end, which is nice to just be able to hand out that bowl of water. And it does some other functions as well that will be important later on in your journey in terms of serving other people. There's some energetic aspects of side handle ceremony in terms of serving groups. But I keep repeating over and over again, I don't recommend that. It's not that I'm saying, by the way, that when you start drinking tea, you should just absolutely all your tea sessions should be alone. You should push. I don't make tea for people. My teacher said, all my tea's alone. It's not about that. Make tea for people. Serve all your friends, serve your family. There's a difference between serving tea and publicly serving tea. There's a difference between Janos comes over to my house and he's got a stomach ache. And I say to Janos, hey Janos, my teacher told me that peppermint works really well for an achy stomach. You want to try some? And he's like, okay. And so I make him a little bit of peppermint tea. That's a very different thing than me going into downtown Miaoli, Taiwan and renting a shop front and becoming a professional herbalist. Those are two very, very different things. And doing that second thing, you know, in the case of medicine of that type, it's even more dangerous. So it's exaggerated, but it still works as an analogy when compared to tea, even though it's exaggerated. Doing that, I might, first of all, harm the health of people because I'm not trained properly and I could give them the wrong herbs. And they could, you know, they could be sick, more sick. But second of all, I'm not doing myself any service either, because if I really want to help people, what I should be doing is going and studying to be an herbalist, not treating people publicly. Just like a medical student can give advice to their friends and family, but they shouldn't open a practice until they're ready. Now that analogy is exaggerated because it's not like by serving tea publicly you're really going to hurt people. So that's why it's an exaggerated metaphor. It's not, you know, really to that extent. What you're really more hurting is yourself. So this advice, I'm not giving this advice really because I am very worried about the purity of the tradition. Though the purity of the tradition will be affected by people that are not trained and don't know what they're doing going out and performing it publicly. Because then the people that see them aren't seeing it as it should be. They're seeing it with mistakes, and then they take that as their form. And then you see, I've met people who have learned this tradition from someone who learned it from someone who's learned it, and it's now like it's like the little I used to do it in the kindergarten. They like say purple elephant, and by the time it goes around the room, it's, you know, polka dotted giraffe. It's very different now, right? But if I didn't want that to happen, I wouldn't give it away to the world. It's yours. These techniques are yours. Do with them what you will. The teachings of this course are a buffet. You take what you want, and may it help your life and serve you. So what I'm just giving you is some advice, which is that, you know, so I'm not so concerned in terms of like in the analogy of the medicine shop of your like harming others, because when you're out serving tea publicly, you're not really going to harm others. More why I keep coming back to this advice is because it's more going to harm your practice. Because this is a practice where progress is measured in the ability to listen. And what you're essentially doing is coming to one class, hearing a little bit, nodding your head and being like, okay, got it. And then going out and talking. You see what I mean? You're without really absorbing, really listening for a long time, both listening to tea and listening to the ceremony. So in other words, lots of drinking tea and listening to her and her messages, but lots of years of practice of the ceremony itself. So it's becoming muscle memory, and it's a part of the way you live and move, and you are it. And then when you go to speak, you're speaking on its behalf, right? As opposed to like, okay, I watched the video 7 times. I know all the steps. I've got them memorized. Yep, you bring the bowls out, you spin. Yep, you spin, you do it like this, then you do it like this. Good, got it. Now I'm going to go tell a bunch of people. And then, right, your mistake was got it, because there's never a got it. In fact, this is deep, but think about it. By saying got it, you're literally saying don't got it. Because in the path of Tea and Zen, for life we are students. The more you progress, the more you don't know. The more open I am, the more I don't know. The more I listen, the more I don't know mind. Not don't know mind in the sense of confusion, trying to figure it out, but I can't do it. No, don't know. Open. So by saying, got it, you're actually doing what a student does, what a beginner student does, right? It's like that study that was done by Cornell, where they looked at the difference between perceived skill and actual skill. And it mapped very differently than you think it would be, right? Which is that you would think that in a perfect world, one's actual skill and the perception of one's skill would grow together. So I start with 0 skill, and I know I have 0 skill, and then as I move, I have this much skill, and I know I have this much skill. But it doesn't work like that. It's actually a dip. In other words, beginners think they know everything, like young people. This is why traditions are so valuable. I talked about this because they're ideas that have cooked, they're ripe, they're ripened fruit, they've been around a long time. Young people are tender and young, and they think they know everything. If you got teenage kids, you know what I'm talking about. And so the beginner thinks they know everything. But then you get into that thing a little bit more and you realize, whoa, wait a minute, there's a lot in this that I didn't, whoa. And then you're like, you realize, holy moly, I don't know anything. And then what they actually found in the study also is that experts always underrate their skill. Why? Because they're super critical of their own abilities, because they have so much skill that they're able to see all the mistakes that the beginner can't even see. That's why sports commentators are often ex-athletes. If you want to hire commentators for the football game, it's better to have people who used to play football, because they have been down there in the field and they know what's going on from the insider's perspective. They can comment, they'll see things that an outsider won't see. Right? In other words, you go to a concert and you hear Derek Trucks just shred it. And you go home being like, wow, he shredded the guitar. He's so good. But he knows all the mistakes he made. They're just, those mistakes are so subtle that unless you really, really understand the guitar and understand the song, you don't get it. And he's a professional, so he knows how to, when he makes a mistake, to just keep going with the flow. Like theater performers. When somebody forgets the line, somebody just picks up the next line and you never know what happened in the audience unless you've memorized that play, which you most likely haven't, you see? So as you move to more subtle things, you're making lots of mistakes and you see them, whereas the guests might not, because they're not even trained. So my point is that in this path, we are literally practicing opening and becoming a student more and more and more. So the more you say, I know, I got it, the more you're moving in the wrong direction. The student of Zen and Tea is moving in a direction of, I don't know. And the more you say, I know, I've figured it out now, you've just cut off growth. You're not absorbing nutrients anymore. You're graduated, in other words. And Tea is a lifelong scholarship. Okay? So by saying, yep, I watched the video, I got it. Now I'm going to go talk about it. Right? You see, that move is a beginner move. And it's a mistake. Because now, by putting your efforts in that, even though it's good intentions, you just want to help, I get it. But by putting your efforts in that, you're now stunting your ability to listen, because you're talking, basically. You're outward focused as opposed to inward focused. And so my advice is serve your friends, serve your family, serve anyone that comes over, serve them tea, and listen. And take the time, take maybe years, maybe decades, who knows, and listen and listen. Listen to the tea, listen to the ceremony. Listen to both until they become you, until you're able to go share them with others because you are them. And that what you're sharing then is the tea and the ceremony, not you. In other words, then when you go to share, the tea and the ceremony doesn't have to be so filtered through you. I hope that makes sense. So I'm not really concerned in terms of like, you're going to hurt people if you go out and serve tea publicly. I don't think that. You're doing good. And if you are a hurt person, you might find healing through healing others. There's a great power in that truth and path. And so I'm not trying to discourage you if that's your calling, but warn you that doing so might stunt your growth. Better to take some time and receive and learn to listen, because it's contrary. It's the language of the mind, of the world. To I'm going to take that and go build, fill, do, right? As opposed to I'm going to take that and go grow and plant and let it grow, right? This is the patience of a gardener. We don't, in English we mistakenly say, I'm growing corn in my backyard. No, you're not. You don't grow corn. Corn grows. The sun and the minerals and the nature of the corn grows itself. What we do is make space for corn to grow. And that's the path of tea. Making space for the meditative mind to grow, as opposed to going and building it or constructing it or making it grow. Hope that is helpful. We have some good homework for today, day 5. Questions to contemplate. Am I meeting tea halfway? Number 2, what are the areas of my practice that need more investment and why are they lacking? Number 3, what does it mean to serve others? Some exercises. Think about the 5 areas of practice and map them to your own life and your own interpretation and how you can think about them. Moral uprightness, study and contemplation, meditation, devotion and prayer, selfless service, and movement. 6. And think about making friends with teaware and what that entails and how communication between teaware and myself works. We're going to post a 3rd meditation instructions, the last one for the course today. And actually there'll be a different type of meditation. At the end of the meditation instructions, I've been giving metta. We're going to have a whole hour of metta for the final day, day 7. But for starting today and for the next couple days, we got a third meditation instructions that will be up. You could listen to them 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day. Drink tea, continue to hold the bowl properly, listening to your body, to the tea, to nature. Start practicing side handle bowl tea ceremony and continue to practice chashi as well. In the heaven discussion, we can discuss showing up for tea. We've been talking a lot about tea showing up for us. Let's have a discussion about how we can show up for tea and for nature and for this earth and for spirit. How can we show up as individual humans? How can we show up as a society for nature? And then for the earth, we can discuss side handle pots and ceremony. And the slogan for today is a deep and powerful one. You can think about it. Only sacred sees the sacred. Only sacred sees the sacred. So that's our homework. Some really good homework and useful. I hope these lessons were helpful for you. And now you have 2 brewing methods. That's all we're going to cover in terms of brewing methods in this course. It's plenty. Actually, we could just spend this whole course just with leaves in a bowl. And you could spend years with just leaves in a bowl. Remember, there's nowhere to go. 1 to 10, 10 to 1. Advanced techniques are basic techniques mastered. So now you have 2 brewing methods. You've got water, you got chashi, you got a way to hold the bowl, and you got a human body, and you got nature, and you got tea. It's all that's needed. I thank you very much. It's a really wonderful day. Great to have you guys here. I can't wait to see you tomorrow.